Hello and welcome to Myth Monsters. My name is Erin and I'll be your host for these little snack bite-sized podcasts on folklore and mythical monsters from around the world. These podcasts focus on the actual cryptids, folklore and mythic monsters from global mythology, rather than focusing on the full stories of heroes and their big adventures. I'll also be dropping in some references that they have to recent culture, and where you can see these represented in modern day content, so that you can learn more and get as obsessed as I am about these absolute legends of the mythological world. Autumn is well and truly over, and I'm ever grateful for the change in the weather over here in the UK, although it has been very, very cold the last few weeks. And as you should all know, if you've been listening to my show, I am very anti-summer, and spooky season is my favourite. So as a spooky podcaster too, it certainly should be the best time of year for a good ghost story. This week we are travelling over to one of my favourite places and one very near and dear to my heart, the beautiful Germany, for a bunch of monsters this week, all under one name, the Feldgeister. Vielen Dank and a big shout out to Leah from northern Germany who suggested this one. I've not heard of this one at all, so I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to cover it. So, what is the Feldgeister? An interesting question, actually, with a really big answer. Feldgeister are what they say on the tin, field spirits, one that haunt the cornfields of Germany, but there are lots of different types of them. Typically, people think of animal or human spirits that all live under this umbrella term, and I'm going to go through all of them separately for you, as they all have their own descriptions, physically and in what they do. Some are not very well described, others have loads of information on them, so I'll try and give a good summary of each. We will start with the carnivorous ones, with the most famous being the Roggenwolf, meaning rye wolf. These are often equated to werewolves, but would steal children and eat them in the shape of a wolf. Then there's the Erbsenbär or pea bear, the Kornhund, the Roggenhund or the Haypudel, which are corn dog, rye dog or hay poodle. They would look for children in the fields and tickle them to death, which sounds like a bad way to go, honestly. If you got my feet, I would happily just die then and there. Lastly, the Kornkatzer or Windkatzer, a corn cat and wind cat, who would steal children looking for cornflowers in the fields too. Now onto our herbivores, the Schuhniesel or barn donkey, the Roggensau or the cornbear, which is the rye sow or corn boar, which would steal human children or mount hikers' backs till they broke. The corn steer is the corn bull, which changes throughout the year to fertilise fruit trees, usually named after the month, such as April Oxer or May Oxer, which translates to April or May ox, for instance. Then we have the Weissenvogel, or wheat birds, and the Getreidechen, the crane rooster, who would then wait for children to peck out their eyes. Lastly, in our full animal section, we have the Haferbock and the Hafergeist, which are the male and female goat spirits, translating to oat buck and harvest buck. These creatures are most famous at Christmas time for fertilising fruit trees, but they're also associated naturally with Krampus, another German folklore monster I've covered in another episode. They would only have 3 legs, but they would cry to announce springtime, and any imitation of this would invoke terrible punishment. The spirit will hunt you down till it eats you alive, or gives up and hangs itself on your door as a bloody coat. It would slap people looking out of their windows at night, and is considered the mount of the devil, bringing bad luck to crops and cattle alike for the harvest time ahead. They also kill kids, but they can also steal and slap them too. The Haferbock and the Habergeist are kind of semi-humanoid, but there are 2 that are full-blown hybrids, such as the Katzenmann, or Catman, and the Bockman, literally meaning Buckman, who also both steal children. I hope you see a theme here across these monsters. Now onto our humanoid versions. We'll start with the Hefekönig and the Hefekönigin, the Oat King and Queen. They rule over all of the other Feldgeisters. Then we have the Cornkind, or corn children, who were born of the harvest. And then there's the Windsbraut, or the Wind's Bride, who would steal the earnings of farmers, but could be disarmed by throwing a knife at them. They were also sometimes considered sorceresses in their own right, but also sometimes demons, so I'll let you decide. We also have the Bilvis, which was male or female and demon and human all at once. They had flying hair, wore a little triangle hat, and were clothed in white linen. They would roll through the fields as giant destructive balls or whirlwinds to steal grain, cause nightmares and illness, or to just ruin your hair. They could only be stopped by someone throwing a knife with 3 crosses engraved on the blade and shouting, "Du hast du es, Bilbsi," or "There you have it, Bilwith." You could also hang some of the grain heads in the chimney to banish it as it would die. Lastly, we have the big two, Haferman and Roggenmuum. The Haferman or Oatman was a male corn demon who stole children, and he would wear a large black hat and use an iron shillelagh or staff. And he could also look into your windows at night, and the person who saw him would be destined to die in a year. The Roggenmumme was the Rye Aunt, and she is the most famous of the bunch. You may even know her individually. She usually stands as her own monster. She was a female corn demon who was either fully black and white with fiery fingers and shape-shifting powers. She also famously had massive bosoms, which were filled with tar, and nipples made of iron, which were so large she would have to throw them over her shoulders in order to run. Same girl, same. She would chase children with the speed of a horse with a large whip that caused lightning when snapped, and would force them to breastfeed. She would also replace children with changelings, more on them in another episode, or pound children with her iron butter churn. She is the mother of all the Roggenwulf, and is often accompanied by them in the hunt. The Roggenmumme would look through the fields for food and eat the grain remaining, and when the grain was bad, she would punish the farmer. However, it was seen as a good sign of a harvest to come if she was spotted marching through your field. Now, you're probably listening to all of these and going, Erin, you have just listed a bunch of German names, a bunch of a general description of each of them, but they obviously come from farming. These are all farming demons. Throughout the year, grain and fruit harvests were left to grow and flourish, and when the harvest comes in the autumn, the last few grain heads and tree fruits would typically be left as a sacrifice to these agricultural spirits. This happens still to this day, but of course it was more common during the Middle Ages. During the harvest, the spirits are known to run from the mowers and harvesters to the furthest point of the field, but those last few spirits are trapped in the remaining tribute stalks and haunt the fields looking for victims. Yes, it does seem counterproductive, I hear you say. I have noticed this while researching this one. Appease one spirit, annoy another. It's weird. What can I tell you? Their victims across the board are typically children, as I mentioned throughout all of these specific monster types, but they're not exclusionary. They will hunt anyone who lurks nearby. The only way to get rid of the spirit is to cut the last grain heads and to fashion them into corn dolls and bring them back to the village in a ceremony to celebrate the end of harvest. But during the weeks leading up to this, the spirits can cause a lot of trouble. Any direct contact with any Feldgeister will cause immense illness, sometimes causing death in itself, as well as the myths attached to all of these singular monsters I've listed, so those curses. Although they may seem to be completely malevolent in this instance, the Feldgeister are also seen as wind spirits, who can control all lightning and rain too, and are essential for farming, and so they are looked upon very positively in some lights and very negatively in all of the drama they cause. Now, moving on to etymology, Feldgeister is of course from the German language, meaning field spirits very literally, but another name for them is Korndämonen, meaning corn demons. They're both very literal, I'm afraid, but they are what they are. Of course, all of the specific monsters have their own translations I went through, but as I said, most of them are very literal as well. Their history is actually semi-recent, starting in the 1900s, which is interesting as most of us know what was happening in Germany and across Europe at this time, especially in the early 20th century. Germany has plenty of land for farming, and before the First World War, it was a significant and popular means to an end. After the land was decimated by the war from 1914 to 1918 and its rationing, the German people were massively impacted by food shortages, which ended up having the general public relying on stuff like turnips and led to mass malnutrition whilst they battled the horrendous economic impact of the Versailles Agreement on the people. Following the Second World War, which was 1939 to 1945, the government tried to encourage farming and implemented tariffs to protect farmers, which led to price drops, but these policies ultimately caused widespread debt across farmers by the late 1920s. So fruit, veg, grain and wheat was incredibly valuable, and the harvest was a really important time for the German people throughout the 20th century and of course beforehand. This naturally leads into folklore, and in 1929 the first depiction of a Feldgeist as a cat with hair like wind for fur, called the Windkatze, which you might remember from earlier. They were said to look like domestic cats with a tornado-shaped tail and wind-sweeping fur seen throughout the harsh winter. Following up in 1935, the Roggenwolf was first mentioned, and in 1942 the Haypudel was introduced. There are rumours that they are in the Grimm stories, which date back to 1812. However, when I went through my copy of the Grimm tales, I could not find anything specific about them mentioned. However, that is not to say that they didn't exist before 1929, when the Windkatze was first written about. This could have been spoken about within circles, within villages, and just never written down officially. So what could have been happening in reality to make the German people believe in a folklore figure instead? Well, unfortunately, we do know of a reason that grain can be linked to death, and that's ergotism. Ergotism, or St. Anthony's fire, is caused by the Claviceps purpurea fungus that grows on wet rye grain when it isn't stored properly. It was rife during the Middle Ages, where it caused muscle spasms, fever, diarrhoea, miscarriage, vomiting, gangrene, and most importantly, hallucinations. Rye is one of the most popular grains from Germany, which is why rye bread is a very strong cultural food over there, and is delicious, by the way. It was actually commonly mistaken for witchcraft, so much so that in Salem, witches were blamed for this instead of their dodgy grain, leading to one of the most famous witch trials in history. So this does have supernatural historical tendrils too. They do kind of act as a cautionary monster to avoid those dangerous cornfields within harvest time. You certainly wouldn't want to be caught in a field when a giant mower is coming at you, and this definitely would apply to their main victim, children, who would be playing in fields like this. So it works as a deterrent, much like a boogeyman too. Now, I hate to disappoint, but maybe I'll surprise you instead. Usually for each of my monsters I have a mythical comparison, or something similar that I can point you to in other mythologies where they mirror each other. But this time, I've come up with nothing that sits as well as these monsters. They are truly in a league of their own, which is pretty cool and almost unheard of in the history of this show so far. And of course, it is a slightly different monster anyway because they are an umbrella term of monsters. There are a lot of them underneath the Feldgeister umbrella, but it is something that we haven't seen before, so very exciting. Now, moving on to modern media, we don't have anything for this one specifically, I'm afraid. Are you massively surprised? Because I wasn't. But what I have done is filled this out with nature spirits turned bad and nature getting her revenge tropes. So I hope this appeases any craving for Feldgeister media. For art, have a look at independent work this week, and specifically the separate variants of the Feldgeister for some really cool interpretations, especially of the Roggenmumme, the Roggenwolf and the Heibergeist. In movies, we have Gaia, The Happening, No Blade of Grass, After Earth, Batman and Robin, Fern Gully, The Last Rainforest, Avatar and The Hollow Child. For TV, we have Edge of Darkness, American Gods, Zoo, Charmed, Avatar The Last Airbender, Once Upon a Time, Batman the Animated Series, Power Rangers, and Hilda. In video games, we have ones such as Don't Starve, City of Heroes, Elder Scrolls, Sin and Punishment Star Successor, Home Safety Hotline, Final Fantasy, Albion, Azura's Wrath, Kid Icarus Uprising, League of Legends, Quest for Glory, The Legend of Zelda, Terraria, Leshy, Total War Warhammer, The Witcher, Touhou Project, World of Warcraft, Cult of the Lamb, and World of Mana. My book recommendation this week is for Sunken Castles, Evil Poodles, Commentaries on German Folklore by Jürgen Hubert, and Tales of the German Imagination from the Brothers Grimm to Ingeborg Bachmann by various authors for a really good and thorough look into folklore from this part of Europe. There is, if you are one of my German listeners or you read German well enough, a book specifically on Korndämmerungen called Die Korndämmerungen, Betrag zur germanischen Sittenkunde, or The Grain Demons, A Contribution to Germanic Moral Studies, which is a really interesting read about these monsters specifically, but I couldn't find an English translation, I'm afraid. Thankfully, I read German quite well, so that's alright. But now it's time for Glaube ich, dass sie existieren? I hope you enjoyed my jazzing up of that. But my answer is no. But I do believe that Urketism could possibly be blamed for this, and completely explain this monster. Whilst I understand that the harvest throughout history and the world is extremely important, and the Germanic gods certainly may have looked for a little bit of sacrificial grain, I do see this one more as the people just might have been a bit mad. Also, what do these spirits have against children? They really do seem to hate them. For the Roggenmumme, I'm picturing a really big, tall lady with boobs over her shoulders chasing me, and that's enough to keep me away from Farmer Maggot's field, just like Merry and Pippin in Lord of the Rings with their vegetable loot. We all know that science has come a very long way from then, and whilst this doesn't explain the 1900s origin, I guess we can also attribute this to starvation, malnutrition, extreme geopolitical stress, and potentially still a tiny bit of ergotism in some areas, I am sure. Also, just as a note, ergotism still happens when you store it incorrectly. So it still happens to this day, just not on mass scale because we know about it. Just want to stress that. However, I do think this umbrella term of field and corn demons is pretty neat. I love that there are so many types of them, and that if you saw any animal, you would just assume it was a Feldgeister in some parts. It's great. But as I also said previously, I also understand that the harvest was essential and sacred amongst our earlier Germans, and even more so during the war-stricken and rationed countryside of the early 20th century. I do think they're a really cool monster though, and the fact that they're super unique, but have a whole load of variations within it, es ist sehr cool und interessant. But what do you think? Do the Feldgeister haunt the near-harvested fields of Germany? Let me know on social media, I would love to know what you think about this one. What an apt monster for this time of the year. I'm thrilled that I finally got to cover this one. A big thank you again to Leah, and I hope I did the Feldgeister proud and I'm off the reaping list next time I come over to my beloved Deutschland. Next time, we are heading over to South Africa and Zulu mythology and looking at a water spirit, hybrid monster of legend. Be sure to pay your respects to the revered spirit, the Inkanyamba, next time on the show. For now, thank you so much for listening. It's been an absolute pleasure. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give it a rating on the service you are listening on. I've got loads of social media for any questions or suggestions on what monsters to cover next, and I'd really love to hear from you. The social media handles for TikTok, YouTube and Instagram are Myth Monsters Podcast, the Twitter is Myth Monsters Pod, and Blue Sky is just Myth Monsters. But all of our content can be found at mythmonsters.co.uk, and you can also find us on Good Pods, Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon if you want to help me fund the podcast too. Come join the fun though, share this with your pals, they might love me as much as you do. But for now, stay spooky, and I'll see you later, babes.